I mentioned that we knew about this, well, earlier. Why did we know about that earlier? Well, because NP Nation is now inside the longest ballot committee. When I testified at the Parliamentary Committee about the longest ballot, I was asked whether the longest ballot committee would stop after all the attention they garnered. I warned parliamentarians that they wouldn't. We now know that they are intending to run candidates in the Terrebonne riding, and for the first time, we have been watching this unfold in real time, receiving communications that are sent out from Kieran and Thomas as they plan to run again the longest ballot. Let's take a look. Reported by CTV, but we were aware of this about 9 days ago. The longest ballot committee protest returns. Targets by-election in Terrebonne. Ottawa. The group that recruited hundreds of people to run against the Conservative leader in last spring's election and last summer's by-election says it's now targeting the hotly contested vote in Terrebonne next month. Liberal candidate Tatiana Auguste won the Quebec seat in the April 2025 election, beating the Bloc Québécois Nathalie Sinclair-Desgagnés by a single vote. It was later revealed that Elections Canada had sent mail-in ballots to some electors with an incorrect return address, meaning they were never counted. The Supreme Court of Canada invalidated the election result after a legal challenge, and the seat was declared vacant. Prime Minister Mark Carney called a by-election for April 13th, the same day voters will go to the polls in the Toronto ridings of University Rosedale and Scarborough Southwest. Quote, long ballots are a lot of fun, but most importantly, they create a platform which we use to point out that politicians shouldn't be in charge of their own by-election rules because it's an obvious, inappropriate conflict of interest, end quote, said spokesperson Thomas Shukevich in an email. Shukevich said, an independent, nonpartisan body should decide election rules. In the past, the longest ballot committee has said it was pushing for reform of the first past the post system. Here he goes again, and here Kieran goes again, and they're making a mockery of our democracy once again. I just want to take everybody back to committee back in October, where the Bloc Québécois MP was questioning myself and the Liberal called witness David Moscrop on whether we think the longest ballot would just stop. And maybe because of all the attention, this would be the end of it.
Do you believe that with all that we've discovered about the longest ballot committee and the violations of the Elections Act that they involved, is there any possibility that the movement dies out by itself because fewer people will be tempted to take part in a move like this if they knew they would be violating the Elections Act?
I mentioned forbearance earlier, and I'll tell you, I was thinking about this yesterday walking around. Like, I'm going to think about this as a democratic theorist. I'm going to think about this as a journalist. I'm going to think about this as a citizen of this country. I'm going to think about this as someone who actually supports electoral reform. What's the best outcome here? And the best outcome is they stop. They take the message. They exercise some forbearance. And they say, you know what? This isn't working. In fact, it's doing harm to our elections, but also to their stated goals. Let's try something else. Let's move on. And then perhaps the Parliament could look at small legislative changes to make it slightly less likely this happens in the future. But honest to God, I think the best answer is they stop. And I know they'll be seeing this, and I certainly hope they take that message to heart, because it's not doing us any good.
And what I would say is we've done a lot of monitoring of the long ballot social media, and they've been monitoring these committee meetings. They were monitoring the committee meetings last fall, and they have heard all these suggestions, and on their own social media, they're posting, don't worry, no matter what they do, we're going to continue. So they seem intent on this, and I think that's evidence back from the original court decision in Alberta of 2017, where the lead organizer, Kieran, tried to have all of the restrictions to register as a candidate to vote wiped away. And luckily, the Judge Inglis ended up only striking down the $1,000 bond. Can't say we didn't warn them, right, NP Nation? But in the days prior, Thomas Sienkiewicz was questioned, and we all remember how that went down. But I want to go back to that because here again, he's saying, well, our main goal is to remove the possibility of politicians deciding how their electoral rules are actually implemented. That's what he's trying to convince everybody. Meanwhile, they spend a minimal amount of effort actually trying to do that. They wait sometimes years between elections. So this obviously isn't that urgent and that important to them, because they just take advantage of opportunities as they arise. And if they don't arise for 4 years, then they don't arise for 4 years. And they all get out their pranks and their bad jokes and their poor songwriting, and they try to call it a protest. Meanwhile, it's just disruption, and it's malicious, and it's a bad and tired university prank. That's basically what this is. And he was asked about this by the Liberal chair, Chris Biddle. Remember this?
I will exercise my ability as chair to ask a question. And it's picking up on what Mr. Culkins was alluding to with appointing people who would seemingly not be accountable. I know in our system, and I think you even spoke about it in terms of the Elections Canada being respected. The executive appoints a nominee to be the head of Elections Canada, and an organization that's independent like the RCMP is appointed and then is accountable to Parliament. It worries me that you're proposing an agency that may not be accountable. Who are these individuals who would be appointed to this committee? I guess is my question, if it wasn't going to be politicians or the executive who was going to make that appointment.
Yep, that's a fantastic question. I'm not a policy expert. It's very obvious to everyone that it's inappropriate for conflict of interest for MPs to be in charge of it. So I'm extremely confident that if you had an in-depth discussion about it, you could come up with something very reasonable.
So well, I guess I'll leave it as a comment that it's very bizarre to me that you're engaging in this protest without the very basic answer to the first question that would come up in solving what you are seeking to protest.
So the same guy in group that are criticizing and ridiculing politicians for being the ones that are in charge of their own election rules, when asked, okay, so who would these people be? And Thomas just says, I don't know. I'm confident that if the same people I'm criticizing and ridiculing and accusing of being corrupt, if you guys have a conversation, you'll figure it out. Well, isn't that doing exactly what you're criticizing them of doing? Of deciding the means by which they are going to hold elections? And this gives Thomas and Kieran plausible deniability, because then they can continue on criticizing, because they're not actually proposing something. They're just saying, well, you have to do it. And then when it doesn't work, they can say, oh, see, you did it wrong. This is the crazy thing. And this is why we don't for 1 second believe they're actually serious about electoral reform. Now, this brings us to the Terrebonne by-election. I mentioned that we knew about this, well, earlier. Why did we know about that earlier? Well, because NP Nation is now inside the longest ballot committee. Hi, Redacted. We're just doing Terrebonne. Let me know ASAP if you would like to run there. You would also need to find someone to be your official agent. It's just a new role with a few forms. Not a lot of work for a $0 campaign. Kieran, later that day. Great, you're on the list. Volunteers will be collecting the required 100 nomination signatures for you. We'll send out the guide with instructions for you soon. Once you find someone willing to be your official agent, have them email us too, and we'll send the instructions to them too. So, what they're doing now, right? What they're doing is they are now having each candidate find their own official agent. Because before it was Thomas. That's why you saw the candidate and all the candidates. And then on the ballot list, they were all under Thomas Sienkiewicz as the official agent. So because these guys see that Parliament is most likely moving to require one official agent per candidate, they are now trying to get ahead of that and change their process so every candidate has an agent. And they also mention you have to run a $0 campaign. Keep that in mind. We're going to come back to that. So here's an email that Kieran sent out, and it says, "Good evening, candidates and official agents." That's strange. That sounds like they're operating like an official political party, like we said in committee, that everybody agreed with. The by-election has been called for Terrebonne. We have 2 weeks to get everything done. Several of you have volunteered to collect the needed signatures this weekend, which is fantastic. A huge thank you from everyone. This weekend being last weekend that already passed. Please find the instructions at the link below. For candidates who have done this before, there shouldn't be anything new, and for official agents, it may look daunting at first, but don't worry, we will be with you every step of the way. Just send us an email if you need any help. Candidate instructions, Google Drive link. Official agent instructions, Google Drive link. If you still have not found an official agent, you still have about a week to find one. If you emailed us and said you could be an official agent or candidate, kindly complete all the forms and we'll figure out where you're best placed as things start to pick up pace with nominations. As always, thank you so much for being part of this important project. This should be a lot of fun. Towards a better democracy, Kieran. And then you notice the signature with Blue Sky, Longest Ballot Committee, Wikipedia, Longest Ballot Committee, and, you know, the famous Handhogs Longest Ballot playlist, because that's important. So, they sent this email out prior to last weekend. I believe this email went out on March 9th. And they said, well, we still have a couple of weeks to get everything done, but we'll have all your nomination signatures. So, I still raise this concern. In the Elections Canada Act, you must have an authorized delegate. Only the candidate or the authorized delegate are actually authorized to collect these signatures on behalf of said candidate. So if these people haven't completed anything yet, how can you have any authorized delegates out collecting signatures for them? And the answer is you cannot, which is a violation of the Canada Elections Act. So that's the first part. Next part. You notice that there was some Google Drive links there. That came in kind of handy, because here they are. Thanks, Kieran. Thanks, Thomas. This is the Google Drive link for one of them. This is for the candidates. And there are some forms in here that are Election Canada forms, and they're above board. That's fine, because it's the official candidate nomination form, declaration of video conference procedure, etc., etc. But there was one in here that was actually authored by the Longest Ballot. Which one is that? This one. Run as an independent candidate in Terrebonne in 2 easy steps. Independent, yet we're coordinating it all like an official political party. Step 1, fill out the form. Candidate declaration with returning officer. And it goes on and it says, here's the form you have to fill out here. Here's this candidate declaration, and it provides instructions on what the candidates need to do. You have to get it document signed by a notary, so you have to swear to it. And then everybody has to email the signed-in witness declaration to longestballot@gmail.com. That seems to be a centralized location for all of these dozens and dozens, maybe a couple hundred candidates to actually run. Isn't that interesting? And then it says, when the declaration is complete, Thomas, who is your campaign delegate, that's the authorized delegate, folks, will submit your nomination to the returning officer. So this is important because if any of the candidates don't actually have this done by the time that they go out to collect nomination signatures, then all of those signatures are invalid because they weren't authorized to collect them in the first place. And that matters to Elections Canada. Problem is, Elections Canada doesn't enforce the act as much as they should, as we saw in committee. Here's the next link that we found. This is the instructions for the official agent. So this is new. They haven't done this before, where they've had each candidate require an individual official agent. And there's a bunch of steps that are actually in here. This isn't a joke, folks. So they have the official agent forms. You have to open a bank account. Yes, you have to do that. So you have to have all these people opening bank accounts. And there's usually bank fees that are associated with that, but we'll come back to that. But they say many credit unions have no fee bank accounts for specifically election campaigns, nonprofits, community groups, etc. Sometimes at banks, if you open an account with a monthly fee, but close it before 1 month passes, then you don't get charged the fee. Double check this though. It's really important that you don't get charged any fees because you need to show 0 transactions in the account and $0 balance. Specifically, make sure that there are no fees to close the account. Again, you must open this account before the day of election, which is April 13th. Close the bank account. Close the bank account within a month after the day of the election. You can close it immediately on April 14th if you want. Before closing the account, get a statement of the account showing $0 balance and showing no transactions. Close the account and get some kind of official confirmation that it's closed. This can be a letter from someone at the bank saying the account is closed. This is where I think they're going to run into a lot of problems. Because before, Shukevich would have done all of this because he was the official agent. I don't know if he opened 200 different bank accounts or if he just opened one and put that bank account against all of these different candidates. But here's the issue. The way they're doing this now, if there is any expenses, then, and they file, like the agent or the candidate files that they didn't have any expenses, both the agent and the candidate are liable. And that could be a problem for some of these people. Now, Kieran and Thomas, they're not. They're not liable whatsoever. So if any of these other people make a mistake, they're liable. So why this becomes important is because we've been doing some other research on this, and we don't think any of these people, and I mean any of them, can actually record a $0 campaign. This is our opinion. Why? We have to go to the Elections Act. This is the Elections Act on the Government of Canada website, and we want to start by looking at specifically Section 2 under definitions. One of those definitions is non-monetary contribution. So that means the commercial value of a service other than volunteer labor or of property or of the use of property or money to the extent that they are provided without charge or at less than their commercial value. Why am I talking about non-commercial or non-monetary value and non-monetary contribution? Well, even though there's going to be volunteers that are collecting these signatures for the candidates, all of them, there's something that we have to take into consideration. But we'll get there. Trust me, we're going to get there. But we have to provide some more context. In the Elections Canada Act, there are some things that need to be taken into consideration. And this is why people who are considering signing up as an official agent for somebody in a malicious scheme, such as the longest ballot, that is going to provide a lot of democratic issues and violate the Section 3 charter rights of Canadians that are voting in these elections, they have to take these responsibilities into account, and they should probably read them. So, Section 477 of the Elections Act, for the purposes of Division 1 of this part and this division, except Sections 477, etc., a candidate is deemed to have been a candidate from the time they accept a provision of goods or services under Sections 364, accept a transfer of funds under that section, accept a contribution, I say again, borrow money under Section 373, or incur an electoral campaign expense within the meaning of subsection 375. So that's fine. Now, a candidate shall appoint an official agent before accepting a provision of goods or services under Section 364, accepting a transfer of funds under that section, accepting a contribution, borrowing money under Section 373, or incurring an electoral campaign expense within the meaning of subsection 375. Prohibition, accepting contributions and borrowing, 477.47 subsection 1. No person or entity other than the candidate's official agent shall accept contributions to a candidate's electoral campaign or borrow money on the candidate's behalf under Section 373. Why am I talking about all these boring sections? Because a contribution can also be a non-monetary contribution. A non-monetary contribution still has value. This is the catch. So, what are we talking about here? Well, a non-monetary contribution can sometimes mean expenses, right? So if people are incurring expenses in order to travel somewhere, maybe hundreds, maybe thousands of dollars, and maybe they're staying in hotels, maybe they're using Ubers, maybe they're, spending money on meals and things like that, those really should be declared. Because the whole point of them is for the benefit of said candidate. What are we talking about? To the best of our knowledge, Kieran and Thomas live in Manitoba, in Winnipeg. So they're typically out there gathering signatures. So they would have to fly from Winnipeg to Montreal and then drive to Terrebonne. Now, it's probable that they're going to have to stay overnight as well. But let's just talk about the flights. So just a quick look at nonstop flights from Manitoba to Montreal. You're looking between, depending on what time and what day they go, between $600 each and $1,000 each. So that's between $1,200 and $2,000 just for the flights. That's if they're both going. And in that case, here's the deal. Because they are organizing this en masse, and they are doing this for not just one candidate, but for dozens and dozens of candidates, this could be interpreted as a commercial, non-monetary contribution, which means every single financial agent for every single one of these candidates would possibly have to declare this as a non-monetary contribution in their audit. So if you have these guys that are traveling across, doesn't matter like if they're expensing it or not, it's a non-monetary contribution. We were actually considering going out to Battle River Crowfoot, and for this exact reason, we were actually advised, you know what, you better stay back, because we would have to incorporate that into Pierre's campaign as a non-monetary contribution expense. So this is where this actually came into our brains. So these agents, these dozens and dozens and dozens of agents, however many that they're going to be, it's possible that this may be a commercial non-monetary contribution that all of them will have to claim, because it's the same guys that are spending the same amount of money for every single candidate that they're actually out there collecting signatures for. So they are trying to tell people that this is going to be a $0 campaign. Declare nothing. All you have to do is show that you've essentially run a sham campaign, and you just have to print out the bank account. It's not necessarily that simple, everybody. And if you're willing to take on that liability from two jokers that have zero liability and zero skin in this game whatsoever, you're welcome to do that. But if you're working at Elections Canada and you're watching this video, I would advise you to look into this, because these are the questions we're asking. And this may spell big trouble for the people that are actually putting their necks out there for the Terrebonne longest ballot.